Hey everyone, so in our very last video we made the front end of our application, and in this video we will continue with our backend. So if you haven't watched my last video, I would recommend you to watch it and then continue with this video. So here we will basically create an API to upload the cropped image. So if I select this image and after cropping it, if I click on upload button, it should upload my image to an Amazon S3 bucket with the help of that API, and the URL that Amazon S3 returns will then get stored on a database. In our case, that database will be MongoDB. So that is the overall task that we will do in this video. So without any delay, let's get started. The first thing that I'm gonna do now is to write the upload function. So let's go to a project and I will go to the cropper folder present inside of this components folder, and let's go to cropper.jsx file. So here we have all our code related to the cropper component. So we have our onDownload function to download the cropped image. We have our clear function to clear the image that we have selected. So now we will also have an upload function. So let's write that function, and this function will get called whenever we click on this upload button. So let's do that. So now let's write the body of the function. I will again implement this check so that we are able to upload only when we have selected an image. So I will just copy this code and paste it here. So this ensures that we can upload an image only when we have selected one, right? So I do not need this line of code. Now let's write the code to get our cropped image. So to get the cropped image, I will use a function which you can find in this croppedimage.js file, and the name of the function is getCroppedImage as expected. So I will call that function here and I will pass two parameters. The first parameter will be the image itself and the second parameter will be the cropped area, and I will store its return value in a variable called canvas. So let's check what this canvas is. So I will console.log the canvas variable, right? So now let's go to our project, and okay, so I have used this await keyword, but since I'm using this await keyword, I will have to make this function an async function. So by doing this, the error should go, and yes, the error has gone. So now let's check what we have on our console. So when I click on this upload button, we get this canvas element. So now let's convert this canvas element to a data URL. So I will again name this data URL canvas to, let's say, canvas data URL, and in order to change our canvas to a data URL, I will just do canvas dot to data URL, and the type of the data URL will be an image, right? So again, let's console.log this data URL. So now if I click on this upload button, I'm so sorry, the name of this will be capital. Okay, so it will be .to data URL should be capital. So now if I click on this upload button, I'm getting this data URL. As you can see, it's a very long URL. Its size is 145 KB, and you can also like copy this data URL by just clicking on this copy button. So but to upload this image to an Amazon S3 bucket, we have to send it as a file object. We cannot send this data URL to our backend, so we will have to send it as a file object. So again, we will convert this data URL to a file object. So to do this, I will again use a function which you can find in this data URL to file.js file. So as the name itself says, that it will convert any URL that you give to a file object. So again, let's do that. I will again use the data URL to file data URL to file to convert this data URL to a file object. So the first parameter is the data URL itself, and the second parameter is the name of the file. So in this case I will name it as cropped image.jpg. So again, let's store it in a variable which I will name as converter URL to file, and let's console.log this file object. So if I click on this upload button, I can see the file object, right? So here, this is the image name that I just supplied, cropped image. So this is the name of the image, the size of the image, the type of the image, and it's a timestamp, I mean the last modified timestamp. So here we have our data URL. So now we can upload this file object to our backend. So without any delay, let's go to making our backend. So now I will create a folder in the root directory itself called the server, and inside of this folder all the code related to our backend will be present. So now I'm just gonna open a new terminal and cd into that server. So I will npm init -y. So we have our package.json file, and now I will install some couple of packages. So the first package will be, of course, the Express framework itself, and then of course we will also need Mongoose, and the last one will be NodeMon, at least for now. So these 4 packages will be fine to set up our initial server. So the packages have been installed, and now I'm just gonna go to the server directory and create some files. So the first file will be index.js, and the second one will be server.js. Also, I'm gonna close these files because we do not need them right now. So now I'm gonna go to index.js and import the Express framework. I'm also gonna import course, and now I'm gonna initialize Express to a variable called app. So now I'm gonna run some middlewares using the app.use method. The first middleware will be course. So this middleware will help us to make cross-origin request, and the second middleware will be express.json, and this parses the request object with JSON payloads. Okay, so now we have written some middlewares, and now I'm just gonna create a simple get route so that we know that our server is running, right? So I'm just gonna do res.json and send a success to true and a message of like server is running. But yes, we did not create the server as of yet, so let's do that. But in this case, I'm going to create the server in this file, server.js, and all our app related code will be inside of this index.js file. So now I'm just gonna export the app object, and we will import that same app object inside of our server. So I'm gonna import it from the index.js file, right? And now to create our server, we will just do app.listen, and for now I'm gonna listen on the port 9000, and let's console.log with a message of, let's say, server is running at port 9000. So this should run our code. So let's go to a browser and make a call to localhost 9000. Okay, so I just forgot one thing, to run a server. So let's do that. I will create a script called start, and here I'm going to use nodemon to run our server.js file. So now just start our server, and yes, we are getting the message which we have written here, right? Server is running at port 9000. So let's make some request to this server, and yes, this is the response that we get back when we call this get route, right? This slash. So now it's time to connect our database to our backend. So since we will be using MongoDB, let's go to MongoDB Atlas and create a database over there. So if you do not have an account in MongoDB Atlas, just create it, and if you have one, just sign in. So since I have already created an account, I will just sign in, and this is the dashboard, right? So at the top left corner, you can just click on this drop down menu and create a new project. So now I'm just going to create a new project. So I'm going to name this project as, let's say, image cropper zoom upload. So this is the name of my project, and just click on create project, right? So now just click on this build a cluster button to create a free cluster. So here you have some paid clusters which you do not need as of now. So I'm going to create a free cluster and select the region which is nearest to you. So the nearest region for my location will be Mumbai. So just select it and click on this create cluster button, and yes, so the cluster has been created. And now in order to connect to this cluster, just click on this connect button and then just add your current IP address. But one thing that you have to remember is that sometimes your IP address gets changed. So when it gets changed, you again have to come to this dashboard and replace your old IP address with the new one. But if you want to avoid that, you can just go with this option, allow access from anywhere. But going with this option will allow anybody to get access to your database if they have your password. So at least for the scope of this project, we can go with the first option. So I'm just going to select the first option and then click on add IP address. So the second thing that we have to do is to create a new user. So I'm going to name the user as, let's say, cropper, and I'm going to auto generate a very secure password, and I'm going to copy this piece of string. And now let's create a file in this server directory called config.env. So this file will have all our environment variables. So for now I'm just going to paste the copied string. So this is our password, right? And now I'm just going to click on this create database user button, and again click on this button. So since we will be directly connecting our application with the database, we can just go with the second option. So just copy this piece of string and go to this config.env file, and now I'm going to create an environment variable called, let's say, MongoDB URI, and paste the copied string. So now we have to replace this piece of string with our password, and as we know, this is our password, right? So I'm just gonna cut and paste it over here. So this is our MongoDB URI, and we will be using this URI to connect to our database. So now let's go to server.js file and import mongoose. So now I'm gonna paste some piece of code to establish the database connection. You don't have to know much about how this code works, because to be honest, even I don't know what all these options are. So just copy and paste the code, right? So this is our MongoDB URI, which we have declared on this file config.env. So we are accessing the MongoDB URI environment variable by calling the process.env, but this now will give us undefined. So as you can see, we are having an error connecting the database. So it is throwing this error, right? Because we have to first set our environment variable so that whenever we access or try to access the environment variable, it looks for in the correct file. So to do that, we have to require .env, which we installed a few minutes back, and then we have to call the config method, and inside this method we have to pass some options. So the first property will be the path to this file, right? So as you can see, this file config.env is in the root directory of the server itself, so we can just do config.env, and by doing that, now we will be able to connect to our database. And as you can see, we have successfully connected to our database, right? So now we can freely access our database. We can create new collections, we can insert new documents, which we will surely do a bit later. So now since our database connection is successful, we can proceed further into the project. So now I'm going to create some folders inside of this server directory. So the first folder will be controllers. So this folder will have all our business logics. The second folder that I will create will be models, and this folder will contain all our database schema, or you can say the collection schema. And then we will have a routes folder. This will contain all our routes. Of course, now this seems a bit vague, but when we create some files and configure it properly, you will get a proper idea of how these things are really working. So let's start. Now I'm going to create a file inside of this controllers folder, and I will name it as user controller.js, and here I will create a function. Let's say set profile pic, and I will also export it at the same time. So this is a common JS way of exporting things. As we all know that NodeJS supports only common JS. So this is how we export, you can say, functions in a common JS way. Of course, there is another way which you can do, but for this I'm going to use exports dot the name of the function. So here we will basically get the request object, the response object, and also the next function. So here I will basically console.log request.body, and again I will return it as a response. So what I'm basically doing is that we are extracting the request.body from the request object, and again we are sending that same data back to the client. Of course, now we have to create the route so that we can call this function whenever someone hits that route. So here again I will create a file called user routes.js, and here I'm gonna import the router, which we can get from the Express framework itself. And now I'm going to create an endpoint, which will be a post endpoint, which again I will name as set profile pic. So the endpoint route will be this set profile pic, and here we will basically call the function that we just wrote on this user controller file, right? So let's first import the file. And now we will just call this set profile pic function, which we wrote here. And then we have to export our router object. As I mentioned just few minutes back that there is another way of exporting functions in Node.js. So this is that way, okay? We can export by doing modular exports or by just doing exports dot the name of the function. So now I will import this router on our index.js file. So I'm gonna name the return value as, let's say, user router, and require it from routes user routes. Now I'm gonna pass this user router as a middleware. So again I will do app.use, and here I will pass the user router. So this, as you can see, is also a part of the API endpoint. So our final API endpoint for this route will be http localhost 9000 API/users/set profile pic. So any request which is being made to this API endpoint will call this function, our set profile pic function that we wrote on this controller file, right? So now let's make a request to this API endpoint from our front end. So now again I will go back to our src folder, and inside of this I will go to cropper and then cropper.jsx. So here we will pass this file object to our backend, or you can say we will pass this file object to our backend using that API endpoint. So the API endpoint is this. So now we'll make a request to this API endpoint using our file object as the payload. But one thing that you have to remember is that since it's a file object, I'm gonna pass this as a form data. So I will create a new instance of the form data. Using the new form data constructor, and then I will append our file object to this form data. So it accepts two values. One is kind of a string and the other is a value. So the string basically acts like a key, so I will name it as cropped image, and the second value will be our file object itself, so which I will pass it here. And then I'm going to make a fetch request, or you can say a post request, using the fetch API to this endpoint. I'm going to copy it and let's paste it here. And here we have to pass some options. So the first option is the method, which will be a post method, and the second one will be our form data itself. This is a post method because here we have mentioned that this has to be a post request, right? So this API endpoint has to be a post request, and as a result we are making the request to this endpoint as a post method. So now this API endpoint will get called whenever we click on our upload button, right? But before that I'm going to wrap it inside of a try catch block. So I'm going to paste, cut and paste it over here. Let's also like console log any error if we have one. So now we are ready to make a request to this API. So I'm just gonna go to our project, refresh it. I'm gonna open the console and let's select a file. I'm gonna again select this file and let's crop it, upload it, and here we're getting cropper.jsx. Okay, so this console.log is coming from this, right? But we do not know whether we have successfully made a request to our backend or not. So in order to do that, I just have to store the return value in a variable, let's say res, and again we have to do const, let's say res2 equal to await res.json. So we have to parse the return value by calling the .json method, and now I am going to basically console.log our res2. So now let's check whether we are able to make a successful API call or not. So again I'm going to click on this upload button, and here we are getting something, right? So it is the data. Okay, but we are getting an empty object. So I probably made a mistake somewhere, and I think I know where the mistake is. So we are sending the data as a form data, right? We are not sending it in a JSON format. So in order to parse this form data, I have to go to a server, and here I will basically install a package which will parse form data. So the name of the package is express file upload, and this package has been installed. So again I will import it. and pass it here as a middleware. So now we will be able to parse form data. So now let's again make a request from our front end and check what we are getting. I'm gonna again choose this file and click on upload, and we're still getting okay. So I think we will also have to change, yes. So this will not be body, it will be files. Now let's again test it out. Yes, and now we are getting our data back, right? So this is the data that we sent, and now we can like confirm that we are sending the correct data. So as I mentioned earlier, that the name of the image is cropped image.jpg. This is the size of the file, the type of the file, and some like other stuffs like data encoding something. Okay, so now we are getting our image, basically our cropped image. So now I will upload that same cropped image to an S3 bucket. So now let's do that.